Hey everybody, we're going to be talking about how to submit and what the assignment details are for your shorter paper, which is focused on tide pools. So I'm going to walk you through the instructions for the paper, show you where to submit it, and we're going to talk about some of the details behind the paper and the project and the analysis that you're going to do for it. So first thing is we're here in our Biology of Marine Organisms Blackboard page. Again, we want to make sure we can open the side menu. We'll go to our assignments tab where we can find all the details for all of the assignments for the term. And we're going to scroll down. I guess I should turn this on student preview mode so you can see what it'll look like for y'all. All right, we go to our assignment tab. We scroll past ecology near me. We scroll past lab assignment, scientific papers, R programming, and here's the tide pool analysis and discussion paper. So this is a folder. It's underlined so we can click on it and we can open up the folder, which is full of all sorts of useful information for all of you. But before we do that, let's read through the requirements for the paper and talk about some of the details. Okay, so first thing is that we are working with the writing project here at Bowdoin, which means that you will turn in a draft of your paper, a first draft, to us and to your writing assistant through the writing project. You'll do that by midnight on September 25th, Eastern Standard Time. The folks at the writing project will then read your paper, give you feedback, and organize a time where the two of you can meet, and they'll talk you through some suggestions for improving your draft. And then your final paper for this tide pool analysis will be due on October 9th at midnight. So you can see that these deadlines are coming up. It's the first half of the class of the semester where we're doing this project. So those are the due dates, just in case you're only here for that. If you want to know some details about this, what we're going to be doing is trying to understand what happens in tide pools. And we know these tide pools are very transient systems where at high tide, maybe they're submerged, and at low tide, they're exposed. And sometimes they're only submerged at peak high tide, spring tide, or during storm events, which means that they're very variable. They get really hot, they get really cold. Sometimes they freeze, sometimes they get really salty, sometimes they evaporate entirely. So we want to understand how these different changing conditions are affecting the organisms that live in tide pools. And to do that, normally during the semester, we would take you out to a tide pool and you could do a field trip and you could measure a bunch of data on pH, temperature, oxygen, salinity, diversity of all the organisms that are there. Instead of that, we are going to provide you with the data and you're going to watch the field trip about giant steps and learn all about the tide pools in much the same way you would if you were here. And we're going to even show you how we do the sampling. But what you're going to do here is you're going to take these data sets that I've generated for you and you're going to analyze them. So inside of this folder, tide pool analysis, there are two data files in a folder called data. One is called Giant Steps Biodata 2018.csv, which is just comma separated values like an Excel spreadsheet. You can open that with Excel. And Giant Stairs Tide Pool WQ for water quality data. These are, again, both CSV files, which means you can open them in Excel, but you can also open them in R. And I've already formatted these data to be really friendly to your analysis pipeline in R. So you're going to be able to read them in and do what you need to do on them pretty easily. There's a couple things that you might need to do on these that we haven't discussed in class. So I would encourage you to try to do the column math and the different little manipulations that you need to do to get the data into the format you like on your own first, then try Googling it, and then come to me or to the TAs for help. And if everybody's really struggling with that, I will step in and provide some significant amount of assistance there. Okay, so step one is you're going to use the data and you're going to make figures. You're going to make the figures that are right here that I just highlighted. First thing you're going to do is make me a 4-panel figure that shows me the percent oxygen saturation as a function of immersion time, and then pH, temperature, and salinity all as a function of immersion time. So these are our abiotic parameters. How does the amount of time that we're exposed to the air change these parameters? You can probably think of a hypothesis just right now. Will oxygen saturation decrease or increase when we're separated from the open ocean? What about pH, temperature, and salinity? Some of that's going to depend on whether it rains or seasonality, but you might have an idea of generally what's going to happen with those. So go ahead and plot them and show me what they look like. It would also be great if you could include the average ocean values as a point of reference, which are provided in the data. The second figure you're going to make is pH as a function of oxygen saturation. So what's the relationship between pH and oxygen saturation? And here I'm going to ask you to perform a linear regression analysis, a simple LM in R. We're going to learn that in week 5 of the class. So if you want to wait until the final draft to do this, you can. If you need help with it and you want to get it beforehand, just talk to me. But we are going to learn how to do a linear regression in week 5. Figure 3, I want you to make some kind of plot of biological diversity or species abundance as a function of tidal height. So how does species diversity change as we go further and further away from the open ocean? And then lastly, it'd be great if you can do the same kind of idea here, but looking at algal species richness as a function of diversity of Littorina littorea. So as we have these littorine snails increase in diversity and in density, how does that affect the species richness of algae? Do they only eat certain species? Do they eat all algae equally? So these are the 4 figures we're going to ask you to generate. From there, we're going to ask you to think about what's happening in the tide pools and write up a discussion. So you're going to write a results and a discussion for this paper. Your results section is just going to be these figures with the figure legends associated with them. And your discussion is going to be 3 to 4 pages double spaced, discussing your results and putting them in context. So what that means is that you're going to refer to the ideas below in this writing section, and you're going to use a minimum of 5 primary literature sources or academic papers to support your interpretation of the data. We're going to provide you with a nice folder full of papers, but we're going to encourage you to step out and find at least one paper that is not in that stack that we're going to send you to include in this analysis. And I would recommend that you go to Google Scholar and you find your papers that way. And if you're running into issues and you're having a hard time searching for papers, please contact myself or the TAs or Beth, and we can walk you through how that might work. So some ideas that you might want to consider as you're trying to write your discussion is, how do you compare high versus low tide pools? What are the differences? You can also consider the differences in water chemistry between high, middle, and low tide pools. Think about which organisms are producing and consuming oxygen. Does tidal height, does this oxygen production change as a function of tidal height? How does tidal height affect diversity of algae? How does it affect diversity of consumers? How might weather affect the tides, or affect the tide pools with regard to tidal height? So how does like rain come in or drought? How are the water chemistry variables related to one another and to the creatures in the tide pools, and why do they change over time? So we're going to give you some of this if you read if you look at the tide pool field trips. You're going to get a lot of this information from there, but some of this is going to really be you extrapolating, or even possibly you can gather some data from reading this textbook. So there's a bunch of different ideas, and I'm not going to walk through all of them here, but you can kind of get the idea. We're going to ask you to write a coherent 3 to 4 page discussion focusing on some of these ideas. If you want to pick 3 to 5 of them and make headed sections for your discussion that's about each one of those, that's totally fine with me. Just make sure that you refer to and cite your figures and also cite your sources. Make sure there's a bibliography at the end. That will not be part of your 3 to 4 pages. How we're going to grade this: if you write your first draft and turn in the associated self-assessment to us and your writing project assistant, you'll get 10 points. So you don't even have to write a good thing. You just have to write anything, and that's 10 points out of your 60 possible points. Your figures are going to be worth 25 points, and the written content is going to be worth the other 25 points. And you can read the breakdown of how all of that will work here. So I'm going to make sure that you make good figures, that they look good, and that they have correct statistics, and then you talk about your statistics correctly and interpret what they mean in the context of the literature. And then you give me a little bit of a conclusion at the end. That's pretty much it. It's a relatively straightforward project, and if anybody's running into issues with their data or their analysis, or they don't quite know what to do, or these instructions were unclear, as always, you can contact myself or Beth or either of the TAs, and we're happy to help you.